Alrighty, hello everyone, and welcome to Mortal Citizens, the Cities of Sigmar podcast, where we talk all things Cities of Sigmar. Thank you for joining us today. I am, as always, Luke, Mr. Sinful Gaming, and I'm joined by at 9-inch charge Dan. Hello, mate. How are you?
Hello. Thank you for having me, Luke. I'm going well, thank you.
Awesome. And we are here to talk about something pretty close to both of us, actually. We're here to talk about Wood Elves, and more particularly, how to bring your Wood Elves into your games of Warhammer Age of Sigmar. There's been a lot of armies recently and a lot of things in Cities of Sigmar that have really made a lot of the old factions in fantasy able to be taken in like full unison again. We've obviously got this in Wood Elves, which we're going to talk about today. We can take them in Living City and bring in those Sylvaneth, but we've had things like Daughters of Cain being able to take in Harkuron now, where Dark Elf players are getting the same feeling that we do from Wood Elves. So with that in mind, we're going to talk about how to use Wood Elves, how to make your old collection work in Age of Sigmar, and try to go from there. So I think to start with, let's talk about why we got into Wood Elves. So Dan, you could go first. When did you start Wood Elves? Why did you start Wood Elves? And yeah.
I started Wood Elves, let me think. I started Wood Elves about the year 2000, so it's making me feel a bit old now. About 20 years ago, when I was in my school days. A friend of mine had some that he didn't want or didn't need anymore, and I had some high elves, so I kind of had some elves, and he gave them to me. And as soon as I started painting them and like playing with them, I just realized, this is the army for me, and I just really fell in love with it. But I think when I was young, when I think back to kind of my even earlier days, I was always a big fan of like Robin Hood and stuff like that, and that kind of aesthetic kind of drew me in, painting the greens and things and thinking of that kind of stuff. And then I think the more I got drawn into the lore, I really liked them because they were the good guys, but they were like chaotic, not chaotic good. I don't even know how you would describe them. They're like they work on the side of order, but they kind of got their own interests at heart as well.
Yeah, it's that there's a great passage, and I think it's the 5th edition Wood Elf book that literally goes through and tells you why everyone is their enemy. It's this passage of like a Wood Elf mother talking to her child, and it's the men are our enemies because the beastmen are our enemies because the other men are our enemies because, and it literally lists everything except Tomb Kings and Lizardmen because they don't know who they are.
And then at the kind of the turn of when the 6th edition book came out, that wave of release of models was just so phenomenal that kind of just solidified my love for them, and I've played them ever since. I've taken them into Age of Sigmar. I played Wanderers for a while, and now I play Living Cities.
Yeah. What else for me? That 2006 release was when I fully got into them. I got into Warhammer a little bit after 2000, so when the Wood Elves weren't quite on shelves anymore. That period, like just before that 6th edition book happened, where they sort of had disappeared for a little bit between. And so that's when I got in. I picked up Skaven as my first army before, but then eventually when Wood Elves got that 06 release, I jumped on them completely and never really looked back. And as you said, that was like an amazing release of models. And some of those models still exist today in Age of Sigmar. And you wouldn't think they're as old as they are.
No, absolutely not.
And so you were mentioning like you came into Age of Sigmar with Wanderers. Like, how did you find that initial thing? Did you like the Wanderers when they eventually got Allegiance abilities as well?
Yeah, I think we were waiting for the Cities book even at that point. I think they felt like an army that you could play, but they didn't quite feel finished compared to the armies that had battle tomes. But to be honest, I was just grateful for some updated rules that kind of made me feel it part of the game. Because I think when you were playing them before and you were just playing as Grand Alliance Order, there were games that I played that I didn't really feel part of. You've got like Stormcast with their shiny new book. Khorne seems to get a book all the time. And these are the kind of armies that I was playing. And they had all these kind of movement stuff that they could do. And then getting the rules in the General's Handbook, gave you an in to be able to do that kind of stuff, which was great.
Yeah, it was really nice to see. Like, I was really excited when I saw Wanderers get it. Obviously, I know completely how it feels playing without any rules. Scourge Privateers is definitely my thing. Playing without an allegiance for a long, long time with them. But they got some really cool rules, and it really made you feel Wood Elfy. And I think, for the most part, like Wood Elves lost a few models, and we'll get talking about these later. But they did lose a few models at Age of Sigmar's launch. Like a lot of their metal kits went away, so we lost like the Warhawk Riders, the War Dancers, the Waywatchers, the Treekin, and the Great Eagle straight up. And then later we also lost a ton of characters and Glade Guard as well. I think everyone was shocked at that loss.
Surprising, really, because Glade Guard, I can remember I had the plastic Glade Guard, but every single model was the same model. But they've been a staple in Warhammer Glade Guard really since the beginning. And they were a fairly new plastic kit, so were the Glade Riders. So it was quite sort of shocking to see them culled. You kind of understand that, on the production line, metal models aren't really what they wanted. Fine cast, isn't as good a quality product as either the metal or the plastic. So you could see the fine cast stuff going, and the Treekin were fine cast in the end. So you can see that. But yeah, Glade Guard was a big surprise, to be honest.
Yeah, I think like everyone was shocked because, we did get an Elf Archer kit kept. That's probably worth mentioning that we actually stole a unit from High Elves. When we came over to Age of Sigmar, we gained the Sisters of Avalon, which are now Sisters of the Watch. They were actually a High Elf kit. That's why they're paired with Shadow Warriors, who are no longer High Elves either. That entire kit High Elves lost because they're now Shadow Blades.
I think the High Elves have made up for it though with a recent release.
Yeah, we might have a little bit of fun chatting about that at the end. But I think the first part that we really want to chat to is, let's talk about the units that did survive and talk a little bit about what they give us, what they bring to the table. And I think there's no better place to start than the only actual character model we have left now, which is the Nomad Prince, or the old Araloth model.
Yeah, my boy Araloth. I absolutely loved this model when it came out. It was, I can remember my friend Tom bought me one, and I was like ecstatic when it arrived. It's just a beautiful model. It's one of those ones that I think, like you said, it's an older model, but it doesn't look out of place. And actually, I think some of the aesthetic where he's got like the hawk on the end of his hand, that's actually, you see that being used in the Lumineth. They've got a model that's very similar to that.
Yeah, he definitely is. He came out on the 8th edition release, so he was very late Warhammer Fantasy. He literally, Wood Elves were the last 8th edition book before the End Times hit. So, that's still old. Like, he's getting on, 8 years? 8, 9 years? He'd probably be, getting close to that 10-year mark. He'd be closer to it than he would not. But yeah, he definitely does not look out of place. He's such a fantastic character model, the pose, everything about him just looks awesome.
And I'd say he plays pretty solidly as well.
Yeah, funnily enough, in combat as well, I've had him go toe-to-toe with an Ogre Tyrant and come up on top. Just that spear, he's got 4 attacks that do damage too. He's not too shabby, but his command ability is really where his strength lies. And for those who don't know, I'm pretty sure it is +1 to hit, if I remember correctly. Save me notes.
I've got it in front of me, though, if you want me to read it. So his command ability is the Lord of the Deepwood Host. You can use this command ability at the start of your shooting phase or at the start of the combat phase. If you do so, pick one friendly hero of this command ability until the end of that phase. Add 1 to hit rolls for attacks made by friendly wanderer units while they are wholly within 12 inches of this hero.
Yeah, so he's got an aura ability. So you can stack in a few different things around there. He's really cool placed near to Eternal Guard blobs that are sitting holding an objective, because when Eternal Guard sit down and all the buffs they get, they can be quite easily 2s and 3s. They've got no rend on their attacks, but with spears they get a ton of models into the fight, so he can really be quite useful. Or Sisters of the Watch is the other fantastic option.
Yeah, so I tend to use him when I play him with Living Cities, he is always coupled with my unit of Sisters of the Watch, and he tends to come on at the same time as them on a board edge, and then you're hitting. You don't count as having moved, which is something we'll go on to when we talk about Sisters of the Watch, but it means they can shoot twice, and then you are hitting on 2s. Yeah.
I think really the only units, they're probably the only 2 units he really gets most of his effect out of. Wild Riders and Wildwood Ranges generally move too fast or want to be doing too much action for him to really get involved.
I think the best thing about the command ability is that it's not one that's used in the hero phase. So a lot of times you have to use it in the hero phase, and then it's whatever's around you. But because you can use it in the shooting phase or the combat phase, you can leave him off the table, then bring him on with a unit, and then buff them in the right phase.
Yeah, so you could do that with Wild Riders who have pretty quick movement, for instance. And generally, the worst thing about Wild Riders is their to-hit roll. They do enough damage when they can get to-hit buffs. So if you can get those Wild Riders moving up the board and with him around them, like you can position the Wild Riders to allow him to come on near them.
Yeah. The other thing I think is really good from him is his bird of prey. It used to, in his old War Scroll, you'd roll a dice, and then on a 4+ or something like that, it would potentially do a debuff to an enemy. But now, you just pick a unit and automatically debuffs it if it's within range.
Yeah, which is pretty cool. It does only pick a single model, if I remember correctly.
It's fine if it's a hero, though.
Yeah.
That's how you do it, or a monster.
Yeah, you sort of send him out to someone who's like... I mean, the difference between like 3s to hit and 4s to hit is tremendous on like some of those monsters. And even those monsters that have like 4s to hit, like that really can change the game. You put that onto like, funnily enough, like a Dark Elf Dragon, like a Dreadlord and Black Dragon, that sufficiently changes that War Scroll. Because now the dragon's on like 5s, which is massive.
The best thing that you could send the bird off to annoy is is probably the Sorceress on the Black Dragon, because it also gives you -1 to cast and dispel and unbind.
Yeah, I think that's like a really unthought of ability with him as well, is the fact that the cast and unbind, that can be like huge on some characters. I mean, it doesn't affect Techless before anyone sort of thinks of that strategy, because Techless don't care. But yeah, he's a really solid War Scroll. I think moving on from there, we've got our units, which can now all be battle line. You'll find if you have a Cities of Sigmar book that it doesn't say that Wild Riders can be. That was FAQ'd so that they become battle line so long as you have a Wanderer's General. I believe none of them are pure battle line, though. Am I correct? Or is it? No.
Eternal Guard are.
Yeah, Eternal Guard are the only pure battle line option we have. So the only way you're getting the others as battle line is to have a Nomad Prince as your general.
It's great.
Yeah, and we will talk about that Nomad Prince. The Eternal Guard now. They're pretty decent. I've run them in a ton of different cities. They are solid.
Eternal Guard, I'm just going to say this, at the minute, are my favourite Wanderers unit to play with.
Yeah, they do their job, and they do their job really well. They're probably up there with Sisters of the Watch for doing the job the best. They probably, for me, just edge Sisters of the Watch. I think they've got the edge on Sisters of the Watch of doing what they're supposed to do better.
I just think the name just says it all. They're Eternal Guard, and if you put them on an objective, they are going to guard that objective eternally. They are not going to move. So the main reason for that is that they have an ability, Fortress of Bowels, and that is add 1 to save rolls for attacks that target this unit if it has not made a move, and then also they can add 1 to hit and wound rolls for attacks if they've not moved. So when they're on an objective or they're just staying still, their save is 3+, which is really good for their points cost.
Yeah, and re-rolling re-rolling 1 or all for their shields. I can't remember. Are they one of the ones that actually get re-rolls? No.
No, they used to, but the game is moving away from re-rolls because people were saying games take ages to play because I'm re-rolling my hits, I'm re-rolling my saves, I'm re-rolling my wounds. So now, when this book came along, everything that was a re-roll just kind of went to +1, which I think, to be honest, is much better. It's easier and it's better. Yeah. So it is both saves you time and is better. But so yeah, like a 3-up save is nice, and like if you have the command point spare, like 3-up re-rolling 1s is solid. I mean, I ran 60 Liberators for a while. 3-up re-rolling 1s is quite solid. They will sit there, and they what are they? 120 points still, or did they go down? I think they were 130 and now they're 120. Yeah. But I mean, usually when I run them in in a cities army, I always have a Phoenix that I bring, and I normally stick the Phoenix near the Eternal Guard. So then if someone's going to attack them, then they get the Frost Aura, so they're -1 to wound them, and they've got a 3+ save. I used to run a battle mage that had fast protection, so they were -1 to hit as well.
That's generally the one that I was running. When I was doing my Halahar, everyone was talking about like Phoenix Guard. I'm like, yeah, but you can have twice as many Eternal Guard as that. And all I used to do is I used to take the Luminarch as well. So yeah, they don't have the 4+ that the Phoenix Guard have, but they've got a 6+ after. And I'd be really interested to try them out in the new city we're getting in Broken Realms, which the battalion's going to give them +1 to that Luminarch. So there'll be 3+, 5+.
Yeah, they'll be really solid. I think the other thing that I want to say, and this applies to all of the Wanderer infantry, is that they're on 25 mil rounds, which is like the smallest base size that you can put an infantry model on, and that makes loads of difference.
Because both combat units have a 2-inch reach.
Yeah, so then you're fighting in 3 ranks with that. So everything's going to get pretty much. You could have a blob of 20 of them, or maybe even 30, and you could be pretty confident that all of them are going to get their attacks in. Which is really significant. You know, when they each have 2 attacks, and then if they haven't moved, then you've got that decreases your chances of getting all your attacks in, I suppose. But if you haven't moved, you're hitting on 2s, wounding on 3s, and although you don't have any rend, it's just weight of attacks is going to do that job for you.
Yeah, that is something worth it is you cannot move at all, so you don't get pile-ins or any of that. So, but the cool thing about like Living City is that you can set them up how you want them to be set up. So you can set up to try and maximize that fight zone, that protection to make sure you fight. You can, bottleneck with terrain and all that sort of stuff.
I think just what I would say on that not being able to pile in is if you're using Eternal Guard how you want them to be used, like how they're designed to be used as a defensive unit, and they're on your home objective or on another objective or something like that, the enemy is going to come to them. They're not really going to have to move. And then when you pick to activate them last, because your enemy will pile into you, and then you won't need to pile in, and you're still not moved. You've still got that +1 save, so you should be able to absorb that damage of them coming in. Going first isn't really a priority for you because you're not going to get wiped.
Yeah, that is definitely like all your buffs come from the defensive side, so there's no reason to be offensive. And if you want to get more attacks in and try and get more attacks in 4s and 4s because you've only got a few models in, you can do that first, especially if you're at like the bottom, your opponent's gone first. You can then pile in with your unit and give up your save and potentially your hit rolls, but you can do the attacks, and then in your turn, if you're going second in the turn, you can use Fortress of Bows then to get all the buffs, and so you can sort of play around with it. There's ways you can do it so that you can activate it in your favor.
I absolutely love a brilliant unit.
Yeah, and we mentioned the other unit there, and that is Wildwood Ranges. The other infantry combat unit, that is. Yeah,
so these are they're a dual kit you can make either out of the box.
Yeah,
and Wildwood Ranges are a really cool unit. What I like about them, we're talking about bringing the Wood Elves forward, is that I really like their lore. So in the old world, they were all orphaned, and their parents were killed by benevolent forest spirits, and then they were brought up and trained to guard future generations from this ever happening again, and they guarded the Wildwoods. So they are specifically trained from a very early age to deal with killing nasty monsters, and that's really cool.
Yeah, and they do it. Like, this was another thing they sped up a lot of things in Cities of Sigmar is random damage. They changed a lot of random damage models to flat damage. And the Wildwood Ranges went from D3 damage to 2, which is really good. I put up a video talking about set damage and how it's better than random.
I guess the thing to say about that is that the flat damage 2 is against monsters, and against anything else it's damage 1.
Yeah, that is worth remembering. But this means they're gonna because that is probably the thing. you probably suffer dealing with is monsters when you're playing like Wanderers and stuff like that. You're not going to be able to, especially like trying like Living City and stuff. You're not really going to bring in anything else that's going to do their job.
Yeah, I think that definitely is their purpose. And the thing about Living Cities is it gives you the movement to kind of get where you need to go. So you can appear 9 inches away if your opponent's got a monster on the flanks. If they're in the middle, it's a little bit more difficult. But appearing 9 inches away isn't too worrisome for Wildwood Ranges because they get +1 to their charge.
Yeah,
so
and if you're thinking the battalion as well, that gives them another +1 to charge as well.
Yeah. So then you're looking at an average dice roll, and if you've got a hero around or something like that, then you can burn a command point.
Yeah. Or even like something like Chronomatic Cogs really benefits them there.
Yeah. The battalion and Cogs is the way to go, isn't it? If you really like the unit.
That is exactly what I've got on my desk at the moment, a ton of Wildwood Ranges, and that is exactly the list I am doing. So nice. There'll be like a 5-inch rerollable charge. Can be pretty sweet. And like even then, like they will pick off like middling units as well with their damage. Like Rend 1, damage 1 is still decent when you got 2 attacks at 3s and 3s.
Yeah, and again 2-inch reach on a 25mm base, so they're all going to get their attacks.
Yeah, like it's not hard, especially because you're coming on in ambush if you're doing all that sort of stuff. There's no reason you can't get 30 models in combat. Like it's pretty easy.
What I'd say about these is that it kind of the opposite to the Eternal Guard. With the Eternal Guard, you don't mind going second and have draw your unit into you. With these, they've got 1 wound each and a 5+ save. So anything with any kind of rend is just going to eat them alive, even without rend. If it's got weight of attacks, they're going to get killed pretty quickly. So you need to go in, choose your target well, and do the damage that you need to do to clear that unit away.
Yeah, these are definitely going to be something like you're probably going to have to trade in the game. Like, don't get attached to this unit. They're probably going to kill one thing, and then they're going to die in return. Even if they don't get attacked back by that thing, if your opponent's going next, they're dead.
Yeah.
Like, if your opponent's got the next...
They are really good at what they do. So, like I said, don't get hung up about them. Just get really pleased at how they've performed when they do charge, and then that's that, I think you were doing a bit of math the other day, Luke, weren't you, about what if they could kill a Mega Gargant and things like that? How effective have you sort of worked them out to be?
So on average, a unit of 30, which easily gets into a Mega Gargant with every attack, if they land that charge, go first, on average they kill it. They do 36 wounds. So on average, they take that Mega Gargant out.
Yeah, I mean, I've had 20 kill a Maw Crusher on turn 1 when they appeared and made their charge. I mean, they're great for that.
And that was with minimal buffs as well. Pretty sure that was just the Nomad Prince on them.
So they, their screens and things like that will really hinder their performance. So you've got to kind of use them in conjunction with your Sisters of the Watch, something like that, or shooting unit, clear the screens, get the chaff out the way, and then try and get your charges in where you need them to go.
Yeah. But it still comes down to the fact that you can also, like, this is why Living City just benefits the Wanderers so much, is you can get them where you want them.
Yeah.
Your opponent leaves a gap, they're in. And another cool thing, they're 25 mils. If your opponent leaves a valuable unit, like, they can get in.
Yeah, any unit, I would say on the charge, they'd be a threat to any infantry unit that was like 10 models or less, any in the game. Easy.
Yeah. So let's talk about the other like foot infantry model, the Sisters of the Watch, which formerly known as Sisters of Avalon.
So not strictly a Wanderer unit, but then I can kind of see how they were shoehorned in the end times of the world that was. Ariel was replaced by Alariel as like the queen in the woods and the goddess of life, and they were always kind of her guard, weren't they, and her specific unit.
Yeah, so effectively Ariel got sick. She was actually poisoned by Araloth and Lilith. but she was always sort of like some weird spirit that was always part of Alariel, and Alariel was always part of her. They're all sort of like this same sort of thing. Like Lilith, Ariel, and Alariel, all very intertwined with each other. And Naith, the prophetess, as well. It's this weird thing. Like, you got to go read all the fantasy lore to really sort of get your head around it, on how they all get connected somehow. But anyway, Alariel ended up becoming the queen of the Wood Elves, and so yeah, it makes sense that they're in there. You probably don't have these models if you're an old Wood Elf player. It's worth just talking about them, because we'll get into why in a sec when we start talking about other things. But they're your only shooting unit. Well, proper shooting unit.
Yeah,
I would say.
Yeah, and also they are access to mortal wounds as well. With one of the only units with access to mortal wounds.
Yeah.
So their profile is they've got one shot at 18-inch range, 3s and 3s to hit, no rend, damage 1.
Yeah, and they do a mortal on 6 to hit.
6 to wound.
6 to wound. So you need to get those hits through. Once again, why that Nomad Prince is important.
Yeah, and you can add one to the attacks characteristic of the bow if there's no enemy units within 3 inches of them and they haven't made a move. And what's important to mention here is in Living Cities, when you turn up somewhere, you don't count as having made a move if you're set up. So they can appear on the side of the table. They haven't counted as making a move. They're going to do 2 shots straight off.
Yeah. Yeah, you stick them near a Nomad Prince. He can quite easily make them 2s to hit and then 3s to wound, trying to get as many 6s as possible in there.
And you'd be surprised at how many you get, actually, to be honest.
Yeah.
If you've got 20 of them, and then that's 40 attacks, and you're hitting on 2s, like, most of those are going to go through, and then you are going to roll quite a few 6s. You are going to do mortal wounds, and then you're going to have a weight of other shots on top of that. They are really effective, I think.
Yeah. And like you mentioned before, like, I find their primary job when I've used them is to clear out the screen so that the Wild Riders or Wildwood Ranges or whatever else you're taking in a Living City army can get to where it needs to go. Those mortal wounds, they're not going to do like hundreds of mortal wounds. They're not going to be one of those units like Daughters of Cain Bow Snakes that do an obscene amount of them, or Lumineth Archers, but they will do enough to get rid of the screen.
Yeah. And the other thing they can do is, so, for example, you were talking about killing a Mega Gargant, and, you know, on average dice rolls, you're going to kill a Mega Gargant, but dice rolls don't always go your way. And if you really want to be sure, you know, before you charge your Wildwood Rangers in, you know, you can fire a few shots from these in, and don't forget, you know, you can split your fire. You don't have to shoot all of them in. You could say, right, 10 of them are going to shoot that way, and then you're just pipping a few wounds off it before you charge in, just to support those other units.
Yeah, without a doubt. So let's get on to our 2 cavalry options, because the cavalry box did survive.
Sorry to interrupt you, Luke. Sorry, but just before we go on to that, there's just one rule about these that I want to talk about: is loose until the last. Ah,
yes, yeah, very important.
So if they appear and they're somewhere, and your enemy is thinking, "Oh my goodness, this unit is annoying. It's like really frustrating me. It's clearing my chaff. It's making holes in my army. It's bringing down those monsters of mine. You know, it's causing more wounds. So they're bringing them down a level on their table, so then they're not as effective, and they want to get rid of them. Well, they're going to want to charge them. However, once per turn, if an enemy unit ends a charge move within 3 inches of this unit, and there are no other enemy units within 3 inches, this unit can shoot.
Yeah, so they've effectively, people probably most liking this, I guess, to handgunners. They have standard shoot.
Yeah.
And which is really cool, because they have it, like, generally they won't have moved if they're set up in the same turn. So they're going to get, how does it work? Do they charge when they shoot? Do they shoot when they're charged, or shoot after the charge is made?
If the enemy ends a charge move within 3 inches.
So you will not get the 2 shots. You'll only get the 1 out of this.
Yeah. And also, if there's no other enemy units within 3 inches, so if you get charged and then another unit charges, you can't shoot twice. You have to shoot the first unit. So if someone's going to double charge you, they need to think about their priority. But what I find is, you know, I'm quite a friendly player, so I will let people know that this is, people ask me about my army when I set them up, I'll let them know. You'd be surprised how many people forget and think, oh, I've got to deal with this unit because it's dealing mortal wounds. There's 20 of them, they're shooting 40 times, hitting on 2s. I've got to get into them. And then what they send is like, they're kind of chaff clearing because they're 1 wound 5 up save. But your chaff clearing unit isn't going to be an elite unit, and it is going to die to these guys shooting them.
Yeah. And they're not too bad in the fight. Like, they'll shoot them, and then they'll put probably a few hits. They'll actually get through a few hits. Because I think...
Yeah.
Are they 3s to hits still in combat?
4s and 4s.
4s and 4s. So, 20 of them, 25 mil bases again. They're going to do a little bit of damage in combat again. Especially, like you mentioned, against the unit your opponent's probably got spare to try and deal with them.
Yeah.
But yeah, onto the cavalry. I think we'll talk about Wild Riders first, because the other units got probably a bit more to talk about. But Wild Riders survived to the end times. No longer Wild Riders of Kurnoth, just Wild Riders, because they love that wild ride. But their biggest downfall for me has always been forced to hit. They need a Nomad Prince.
I think... I don't know if that is the issue as such, or if it's just psychological for me, because in the world that was, they were the most elite and best fast cavalry unit in the game, and they had a massive weight of attacks with Rend, and they were strength 4 as a standard, which is 1 higher than a normal elf, and they were an incredible unit. And now they are not as hard hitting as what they were. They don't really have necessarily the same function that they used to have, and it's just a bit of a psychological barrier to get over that, I suppose. Yeah,
like you think of like Phoenix Guard. Phoenix Guard are much for much from what they were to what they are now. Like Phoenix Guard were probably the best unit in High Elves, and when they came over to Age of Sigmar, were probably still the best unit in High Elves. Wild Riders were probably one of the best units in the game, not just Wood Elves. Like they hit harder than 90%. Like I think only Chaos Knights put out more damage on average than a unit of Wild Riders for all cavalry. They would put Bretonnian Knights to shame. The amount of damage they would do in Warhammer Fantasy, especially 8th edition when they got the update, they became ridiculously powerful.
Yeah, and now that isn't the case, and it's difficult to get over. Do they still have a place? Possibly. I actually think that this War Scroll got a bit of a nerf even from what it was, because Wild Riders used to have an ability before the Cities book came out. I think they could run and charge still, or they charge on 3 dice. They had something to give them extra.
So yeah, their Hornblower was run and charge, and it's now +1. Like all cities.
Yeah. So I'm still having a hard time. The models are amazing, and my memories of them are amazing. But I'm still having a hard time trying to find a place for them. When I think there's other options that you could take in a Living Cities army that are better.
Yeah, if I didn't love them so much, they would not make cuts in my list. But I mean, and they lost shields. They gained them, and then they lost them. It took them 4 years to give them shields, to give that Wanderer unit shields, and then in Cities of Sigmar, they took them away.
I mean, they still come in the box. I mean, maybe you could... I don't know what they use them for.
I mean, is that why they have a 5-up save? If they don't have shields, do they have a 6+?
So yeah, there's not too much to say about this unit. It's fast. They've got a 12-inch move. They're quite cheap. They can be battle line, so they can move around your opponent. They can get onto objectives. They're not going to last on the objectives if they get them, to be honest. On the charge, they have Rend 2 and Damage 2 for their weapons, which is pretty nice.
Yeah, because that's the thing that like keeps you looking at them. Is like that's good. Rend 2, Damage 2 is good. It's the 4s to hit though. You just go back. Even with a Nomad Prince, it's still 3s.
Yeah, and the other thing about them is, compared to the Wildwood Ranges, for example, is they're on big old cavalry bases, and although they've got a 2-inch reach, a cavalry base is more than 2 inches long. So you're not going to fight in it. If you take 10 and you've got 5 in the front, your 5 at the back aren't going to do anything, and that's why I don't really rate them as much as I love the models.
Yeah. Going on to our other cavalry unit, though, this one's got a lot more interesting stuff. The Sisters of the Thorn. They're interesting.
Yeah, and I think these are a really good choice just in general. I think kind of the top picks from this. I think Sisters of the Watch have a look in other cities. Eternal Guard do as a really solid battle line unit, and Sisters of the Thorn I think are just good. They're not just good in living cities. They're not just good for a wanderer unit. I think they're just a good unit.
Yeah, and that's probably mostly due to their spell.
Yeah.
Shield of Thorns is nice.
So Shield of Thorns, or it's called Armor of Thorns now.
Yeah.
Has a casting value of 7. If successfully cast, pick one friendly Wanderer's unit wholly within 18 inches of the cast that is visible to them. Until that unit moves, that unit is treated as being in cover. In addition, until that unit moves, if the unmodified save roll for an attack made by a melee weapon that targets that unit is a 6, that unit suffers 1 mortal wound after all attacks have been resolved.
Yeah, so the combo that everyone runs, it's these guys with some Eternal Guard, because the Eternal Guard then go to a 3-up and are actually putting out mortal wounds.
Yeah, so if they're treated as being in cover, they go from a 4-up to a 3-up. But then if they do their fortress, you add 1 to save roll. So actually they go to a 2-up.
Yeah. And a command point on these is really well spent for those reroll saves on those Eternal Guard at that point. You're better off doing those saves than the Nomad Prince's actual command ability, because then you're trying to roll as many of those 6s as possible.
And they're as fast as the Wildwood Ranges. They also have 2 shooting attacks that cause rend. You're not going to look to get them into combat because they're wizards primarily and support units. So having a shooting attack is really great because they can still cause damage without you potentially having to sacrifice some of them. And they can be a battle line unit that is also a wizard. So people with I know people who take Hallow Heart like to look at them as a potential battle line unit for their army.
Yeah, they're really solid, and I think that's generally like my main 3 combo is like when I was running Hallow Heart, it was Eternal Guard, them, and a Nomad Prince. And that was the core of my Hallow Heart army, and they were pretty decent.
Yeah, I love them. I absolutely love them. And I don't think they're too shabby in combat. They get 3 attacks each, 4s and 4s.
Yep. And then
so you'll get 15 attacks out of 5. Yeah, they're great.
Yeah. So yeah, they're not too shabby. Now, that's all the Wanderer units we have. Now, what I want to talk about next is I want to talk about the units that didn't make the cut, because a lot of people have this thing, and we've seen it a lot with like Lumineth lately, on people sort of talking about how they can use their old high elf models in Lumineth armies. And so I wanted to talk about the old Wood Elf units that didn't survive and what we can do with them to make them usable. Because a lot, like, this is the thing that's cool about cities, is the conversion or just the stand-in model potential that you have in there. And so we'll leave the characters for last, because I feel that's a bit easier, and a lot of them generally have to just be Anvil of Apotheosis. But
yeah,
so
a wizard can still be a wizard in the game. They still fill their place, I suppose.
Yeah. Wizard's a wizard. I don't think there's much really to talk about with the characters. We could probably do that now. I mean, like the Glade Guard on Dragon, I use him as Dreadlord on Black Dragon.
Yeah. The only ones that you'll find difficult are if you have any mounted heroes that aren't on a dragon, that are on a horse or a stag, or a unicorn, something like that. You struggle with those.
And probably the only other one for me is the Waywatcher. He doesn't actually. There's like no bow hero equivalent really for him. Yeah,
but like as you said, Anvil of Apotheosis would help that.
Yeah. Yeah, most of that, and wizards for wizards, really.
I use a Spellweaver as a battle mage because I think the aesthetic fits my Living Cities army better than having a battle mage.
Yeah, the good old foot lord one, the foot male one is a really great one. It's probably my favorite out of all of them. But let's talk about the actual units. So Glade Guard, we'll talk about the plastic kits that were discontinued. So Glade Guard to begin with.
So I can't talk about Glade Guard without just having a little mention to my friend Dan, who is half of the Two Ps podcast. I just wanted to put it out there that it is entirely his fault that this unit is gone. So I used to play Glade Guard all the time. We used to play them in our games, and they were a good unit in Age of Sigmar in the early days for a one-off ability that they had. That was they could have -3 rend. And I used to take 60 of them to do this. And when the Warhammer FAQ came along, you could put a comment of what you wanted, and he just wrote, "Get rid of Glade Guard with -3 rend." And lo and behold, when it came around, they removed them from the game. Now, I do not have any evidence to support that this is entirely down to his comment, but it is in my mind, it's entirely down to his comment.
I mean, it wouldn't surprise me. Like, I remember playing like multiple people, like where they would just remove like more crushes. I've removed Kron's Ironclad in a turn. We were playing like a local store tournament. It was like 1,500 points, and me and Kron were fighting for the win. And this is the only tournament win I've ever got. Me and Kron fighting for the win, and my Glade Guard removed his Ironclad. Like, he came in, killed one unit of Glade Guard because I sat them on opposite ends of my line. Ironclad and all this stuff jumped out, killed one unit completely off. So then my other Glade Guard unit came and shot his Ironclad, and that was that.
I mean, it is ridiculous that. How strong is the rend on a rend 3 boat that it just rips through an Ironclad? I don't know what they have, like rocket launchers like on the back of the arrows, just sending them off. But
the old fantasy lore is they're supposed to be like full of hexes from the Wildwood, is what the arcane bodkins are. They're supposed to be taken from like the branches that grow in like Warhammer Fantasy, the whole Wildwood that we're talking about, the Wildwood Ranges protecting. They used to go grab like the tree branches from trees that try to grow over. And that was what the arcane bodkins were from. There were these trees that trying to escape the Wildwood. And so they would snap off the branches, and that's how they would fashion arcane bodkins.
Sorry to see them go, but there are places you can use them. For example, we were already talking about Sisters of the Watch, although they have a current... you can buy the current box. Mine are converted. Mine are because I like the bows. Mine are the current box, but I put my Glade Guard heads on all of them. But there's nothing to stop you doing a different conversion, for example, where you use your Glade Guard and then potentially green stuff, or do something with the bows to make them look a little bit different.
Yeah, that's actually the one I'm doing right now. Is giving them magical bows.
Nick Yates in the chat. I was doing the same thing the other day.
It's weird because if you are a Wood Elf player, you've probably got 30 to 60 of these laying about. And if you're playing Wanderers in Age of Sigmar, you've probably got 80 or 100.
Yeah.
Like, you've probably got more than that. So you could use them as Shadow Warriors. I think there's better options we'll get talking about for Shadow Warriors that are almost like for like the exact thing you want.
I think with the hoods, they could still make for okay Shadow Warriors, because I think at one point they sort of tried to model them as a dual kit, although they're not in my mind, because they've got some with kind of like open faces and some with the hoods and the cloaks on. And it used to be that you would have Wood Elf Scouts and Glade Guard, and I always thought the Scouts were like the ones with the hoods on. So there's nothing really to stop you saying that the ones with the hoods on could be Shadow Warriors, but Shadow Warriors are a bit more combat orientated than Glade Guard were.
Yeah,
so they don't fit brilliantly.
I think a cool option you could do if you're going to play like Wanderers and really try and do Settlers Gain potentially is you could make them into the Lumineth Archers. The Sentinels would be a really cool one.
Yeah, that would be really cool.
Because like the rules for Sentinels really give me like Glade Guard vibes. But so Glade Riders, I think this is a much harder one for me to sort of find a place for, and I've actually done something rather different with my Glade Riders to make a unit option for. I've been converting my Glade Riders up with spare bits from all the Outriders I built to make Wood Elf Pistoliers.
Oh, I don't know who else has been doing something similar to that. I can't remember. It's the guy who I'm really sorry I forgot your name, but the guy who makes Scroll Builder.
I forget the actual name.
Anthony, I think he's called, but he's been doing some sort of Wildwood Ranges / Pistoliers on foot. So it can be done, and I think that you're right that unit of Pistoliers is probably the best equivalent.
Yeah, because there's not really any. I mean, maybe now you like once again like dipping into Lumineth, you could probably use them as a Hurricane Wind Riders, maybe. Although the Wind Riders do look like they have a much bigger footprint. I haven't actually got my Lumineth to put them in comparison to see if that was a possibility.
I think the base sizes are a bit different, but if you were creative with your basing, then there's no reason that you couldn't. And also, how they kind of charge in and then they can pile this new kind of pile out wall. They have 6 inches. That kind of fits what you would expect Wood Elves to be doing because they're always masters of the movement phase.
Yeah. The other option is, depending how you've built your Glade Riders too, because Glade Riders did have like a bunch of spear options they could build up, is you could potentially do like Dark Riders.
Yeah, if you had the spear variant, yeah, they definitely could be Dark Riders. But they also Dark Riders also have repeater crossbows.
Yeah.
So you could claim that their longbow is a crossbow, I suppose.
Yeah, they're going all legless on that stuff.
Yeah.
So they're the two plastic kits that were discontinued. We're not going to mention Dryads because obviously they exist in Sylvaneth now.
Yeah.
But so let's start talking about, I guess, the metal kits, and we'll do the easy ones, I think, first. For me, the easiest one, we were alluding to it before, is Waywatchers. They are Shadow Warriors, straight up.
Yeah.
They have two-hand weapons and bows.
Yeah, and I think they're in one of the reasons why some of these units got culled is because there were a lot of units in Warhammer Fantasy that did the same job. You can't tell me really that Swordmasters, Executioners, Wildwood Rangers, they're kind of your elite elf units, and you've got Shadow Warriors and you've got Waywatchers and you had Dark Shards. They were kind of your three more elite scout units. So I understand why, from a perspective, when they made this book, they decided that they didn't need 3 units that do the same thing. But all those that's why, as you were saying, Luke, there's a lot of these units that you can just bring back into the game and they do the same job. They've just got a slightly different aesthetic to them. And if you want to bring your Wood Elves back in, they are Shadow Warriors with a Wood Elf aesthetic.
Yeah. I think Waywatchers are definitely the easiest one to include. It's, for me, the next 3 we're going to talk. The next 2, I mean, Great Eagles are going to be hard to bring in no matter what. There's just not a replacement model for them at all. I
think I've seen someone trying to convert Great Eagles into Phoenixes and just put them on bigger bases.
Yeah, for me, they're just so far off on the size.
Yeah.
Like, they're not. The whole Great Eagle is probably the size of the Phoenix's wing.
I think the Lord of the Rings Great Eagles, I think, got a slightly larger wingspan.
Yeah, but once again, but then they're also quite more shrunken as well.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, you're right. It's a stretch, but I think that's probably the only thing I can think of that you could do with them.
So the other major unit for me is War Dancers.
Yeah.
These are an iconic Wood Elf unit that people have that we were talking about this prior and where we think we can go with this. So the big thing for War Dancers is they have fight stances. They got 2 weapons or great weapons. They got a mixture of like weapon options.
Mm.
Yeah,
they're an elite skirmish combat unit, and they used to be able to jump over enemy unit, or over friendly units and things like that. They were great.
Yeah.
I don't use them. I've got some. They brought out a War Dancer hero. It's a Shadow Dancer, and I use him as an assassin model. Sometimes I bring an assassin to give me Shadow Warriors as a battle line unit, and I use him for that because I do like the assassin model, but again, I just prefer the Wood Elf aesthetic. He's the only one that I bring in my army, and I rarely bring him if I'm honest.
Yeah, for me, we've added out the hardest unit to bring. I think in the end, we talked about, once again, like maybe using some other elves. Lumineth, Venari Blade Lords is really all you've got.
Yeah. Because they are masters of their swords, I suppose,
They're going to be a stretch, though, because those Blade Lords have they're on 32s, they have a much wider pose, and the War Dancers are very reminiscent of the 2D era of models. Yeah,
I think the best thing to do with these, if you really love them, is to just wait and hope that when Kenothi come out, they have some, and you don't like them and you prefer your old ones.
Yeah. I mean, it's quite clear, like, Skate's Wild Hunt has such a War Dancer aesthetic, like with the Mohawks, like very, second edition Warhammer.
As soon as I saw that orange, the big orange hair, it just makes you think of War Dancers, doesn't it?
Yeah, completely. There was just such a massive look to the War Dancers for me. Like, that's more the second ed.
The blonde hair dyed with the blood of your enemies, like stuck up like a mohawk.
Yeah. And so, I think the other thing, Treekin, I think just you're going to struggle to find a place for Treekin. And really, I don't think you're going to find any Wood Elf player that really cares much about getting Treekin back on their table.
If I'm honest, they're a unit that I used to use. They're not a unit that I used to enjoy the aesthetic of, I suppose. And I think, the thing that you're going to look to probably is Kernoth Hunters, because they're a similar size kind of tree model. But the Kernoth Hunter models are so gorgeous, and the Treekin models are really not some of the best. I know we said the 2006 release of Wood Elves was incredible and all this stuff. Except for the
This is the exception. Yeah, this is the exception. I mean, I'd never really liked Treekin. I mean, a unit of 6 in Warhammer Fantasy was amazing. Like, I used that unit a lot. Because what were they? They were strength 5, toughness 5 was their big thing.
They were the first monstrous infantry unit that Games Workshop introduced to the game, and they were just a big, immovable block that would deal loads of damage, basically, and they were really good in the game, and their lore and background was fun and consistent, but the models just didn't really live up to that.
Yeah, because they were like dead tree wood that spikes had infested, and sort of made this amalgamation of, I feel that could look so much better than what it did.
Yeah. But the only option you've got at the minute is Kernoth Hunters, but just by Kernoth Hunters.
Yep. It's like I said, I know plenty of Wood Elf players probably own them. I've got 12 in my shelf there, but I don't care that they're not seeing the table.
I just had another thought on the Way Watchers. Sorry, just to kind of circle back a bit, but there's the Way Watcher Lord who was kind of, I guess, stood upright and drawing his bow. That pose is really similar, I was just thinking, to that new Kenothi hero in Warhammer Quest.
I forget her name. But the full, well, we're not sure if she's full elf, because you can't really tell whether those are horns or helmet, and they look like horns.
But she has the Sylvaneth keyword, which is interesting to me.
Yeah, that's now, people were just thinking, is this just a place to give Skate's Wild Hunt a place? But I think the more we look into it, And the more we start seeing how they're pushing it, I'm pretty sure Kurnothi now are going to be part of Sylvaneth. I've done a whole video on like all my theory and all my chat on this. So if you want to go, you can look up Kurnothi on the channel and you'll find a whole theory crafting video on that.
I think that would be great, really. I know we're talking about bringing your Wood Elf army into the present day, but I think in the future it would be great if they could go back with the Sylvaneth, and then really it would be the old Wood Elf army that people remember.
Yeah, and you can probably leave your Wanderers in Cities of Sigmar, but have Kurnoth like Sylvaneth being able to take 1 in 4.
Yeah, I wonder what will happen to them if that does happen, because at the moment in the lore, because when Nurgle invaded the realm of life, the Wanderers kind of fled. They're not in favor at the moment. I wonder if there'll be a.
So they are now. There was a couple of short stories released when they did the lore that like the whole Living City thing is that Alariel has like forgiven them. That's why Living City exists. So that's why Living City actually exists. It was carved out, like Living City was fought for at the main front by Stormcast Eternals and Wanderers. And so that's what the Viridian Pathfinders are, is they're actually like guardians of the forest. They actually know the Sylvaneth Pass again.
Mm.
So not all, but some. But then you have things like the Dreadwood who still hate them. But the Dreadwood hate everyone.
So are we saying we think potential allies rather than potentially rolled in to the book?
Yeah, I would go as far to say 1 in 4, and that's because I think that's how they're going with allies now. I think it's a much better mechanic.
Yeah, I agree.
It's so much smoother. I look at every army that can do 1 in 4. Like cities, it just adds so much depth to sub-factions to cities. And gives each city a unique feel. I love the Caradron Overlords one, Barrack Thring, where it's 1 in 4 Dwarden. Like, that is just, it's cool. Like, okay, there's some broken sort of play in there, but I feel it's so rich in lore of like Barrack Thring's the one who wants all their cousins to come back home, wants all the younger brothers to come back home and everything. I really enjoy that. So I hope 1 in 4 is a thing that continues rather than actual allies.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. I think it's anything that involves less sitting down and scribbling out maths and things, and trying to work out if you can or can't have this unit. Just let me have the unit 1 in 4.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes stuff funner, quicker, simpler, funner.
Yeah,
I can take that thing I want. So, I mean, Living City, we're talking about that predominantly, and that is like there's a major reason we're talking about it for Wanderers is because it contains the battalion. We talked a little bit about it. It gives you +1 to charge when you've come on from Deep Strike, and allows the entire battalion. No, it no longer does that. It just gives you the charge bonus now. But it includes a Nomad Prince, 3 units of Wildwood Ranges, and 0 to 1 Wild Riders, which I think is the best part of the battalion. The fact you can take Wild Riders if you really love your models, but they're also not required because they're bad.
Yeah, I can't see a lot of people taking them in this, but I suppose on the charge, they are Rem 2 damage 2, so on the charge, they are useful.
Yeah. So the battalion's cool, but the thing I really want to talk about is bringing friends in. And so I want to start with non-Sylvaneth, because we can talk about Sylvaneth coming in. But where do you see, like, what units do you like bringing into your Wood Elf force to make your Living City armies better?
Number 1, straight away, we already spoke about them, is Shadow Warriors.
Yep.
I think they're just a really, really solid unit. They completely fit the kind of playstyle and aesthetic if you're a Wood Elf player, that you would expect to see. They thrive in cover. They shoot better if they're in cover, which is cool. They're not bad in combat either. All Living City stuff gets that if you shoot, you can then move if you're within range of a hero. So that's something else that they can still do. So and also they deep strike, I guess, for want of a better word, but not the way the rest of the Living City army does. So everything else has to come on the edges, on the flanks. But if you've got Shadow Warriors, they can come on anywhere on the table that's 9 inches away.
So what's cool about that is because you have to deploy one, then place one in reserve for waiting in the wilds, or whatever the rule is called, I can't remember. One in ambush for your Living City army. Shadow Warriors can be your table drop and not deploy.
Yeah. And also, they're just, when people play you and you're taking living cities, they're worried about their flanks and their back areas and things. And then once you've deployed, they're kind of like, oh, okay, they come on. And I normally deploy quite early off the flanks and things. But then if you've still got that Shadow Warriors in reserve, then they're still thinking, well, okay, so I still can't move off my back line. I still can't move off my home objective because the Shadow Warriors will come and take it.
Yeah, they're a great piece to have. I mean, it just reminds me of like the whole thing with like, obviously they now have the rule, like everything seems to be where they have to be on by turn 3, which I think is a good rule. I like, as much as it hurts the ability of Shadow Warriors, I like that rule. It's cool. It stops like some people auto winning the game late in the game. Which is a feel bad. It's not a good thing to have in the game.
Yeah, I agree. Battle Mage, because otherwise you're not going to have any magic.
Yep, and as we mentioned, you've got plenty of options. A Sorceress isn't bad. I mean, I know she doesn't get like her sacrifices and stuff, but even then, like a Sorceress and a unit of 10, like Blade Wind is such a good spell. Sorry, not Blade Wind. Word of Pain is such a good spell that I like including it. A Hurricanum is a nice option.
Yeah, a really nice option. I used to run Hurricanum a lot, and I've got a converted one somewhere.
If he comes on from Deep Strike, he's in range for his Mortal Wound shot. 2, he means you're not having to spend command points on your Nomad Prince, because he just provides +1 to hit, which you can stack. I've had this where I played with the Hurricanum and the Wild Riders in the same list. When you get them to choose to hit, suddenly they actually start mattering.
Yeah.
And they really, when you get all those buffs combined, they can really start doing the damage. But what else do you like bring in? Is there anything else in particular?
The other obvious one for people who like the Forest Dragon is probably the Dreadlord on the Black Dragon, or Sorceress on Black Dragon.
Yep.
For me, I don't bring the Dragon, I bring the Phoenix, which I've converted to be on top of a tree. So I got one of the old Wildwoods, and then I've got a Phoenix on top of that. And then I found a use for Wild Riders. I've got a Wild Rider converted on the top.
Nice. All right, this is not going to be, but Living City, like all Cities of Sigmar, allows you to take Stormcast. Dracothian Guard are amazing because they have that shooting attack. Now, the Living City's command ability, how it works is you shoot and then move after you shoot. It doesn't say retreat. Even though it's strike and fade away, it doesn't say you have to move further away. So Dracothian Guard have a shooting attack. You can get them within 3 inch after doing that if they've got a hero near them. And Fulminators, or even a big blob of Desolators, even Concussors in your opponent's flank, are all very valid things to come in from Deep Strike.
Yeah, I take 4 Fulminators, and now I want to take 8 Fulminators.
Yeah.
They are the workhorses of the army, to be honest, because they're quick and they're solid. They do mortal wounds. They don't die back. They're just the only thing I would say about that variant, the Fulminators, is they're really amazing on the charge because their weapon becomes damage 3. But in any subsequent rounds of combat, they're less effective. So you just need to, like we said with the Wildwood Ranges, you kind of want to clear out what you're attacking, so then you can move on. So just use them carefully with your Sisters of the Watch if you need to. Just do this extra couple of wounds, and then just keep rolling around the table.
Yeah, and I guess the other Stormcast unit that can do the same thing is the Drakesborn Templar, the smaller side Drake, because the big one can't do it because he doesn't have a shooting attack. But the smaller one, the dude on the back, has a bow. Therefore, you can get a Star Drake. You can get a Star Drake in, and to be fair, it's probably much too big a model to use your Glade Dragon on because the Star Drake is massive.
Yeah.
But it's a cool thing.
The last one that I tend to use, I always get them confused. Is it the Knight Incantor? Or is it the wizard that's got the Dispel Scroll?
Yep, that's Knight Incantor.
Yeah, I tend to take him because magic is kind of just growing and growing in the meta at the minute, and to be able to auto unbind one spell in the game is really useful. Yeah.
Make no mistake, Living City are never going to be an army that's powerful at magic. If you're wanting that, go play Hallowheart.
Yeah. The other thing to say about Stormcast is, I know we've been talking a lot about bringing your old army forward and having an expectation of the play style and the aesthetic, and Stormcast don't necessarily meet that aesthetic. You wouldn't think, but I've seen some really good conversions that do kind of make them fit. And also in the lore, there are Stormcast that live in the Stormkeep in the Living Cities, the Gyran Guard, and they are permanently stationed in the Realm of Life. They have green armor, and they fit the narrative really well, and without too much converting, they can fit the aesthetic.
Yeah. Just like doing that like bright summer green sort of scheme that you remember like of old summer like Taliesin Wood Elves.
And lots of touch on your bases.
Yeah, just like, and even like painting your Dracoths in like very like nice vibrant colors as well. Is a really good way of like blending them in. But the other thing I want to talk about is Sylvaneth, because the cool thing with Living City is it gets not only 1 in 4 Stormcast, but it gets 1 in 4 Sylvaneth. And this is where we were talking about at the top of the show that it's effectively getting the band back together. It can bring back your whole Wood Elf army because you can draw in all those old tree spirits. You can bring a Tree Lord, you can bring a Lariel, you can bring some Dryads. But for you, what is, I guess, your top pick? And I'm pretty sure I know where you're going to
go. Okay, so I'm going to talk about Durthu.
It is the one.
Yeah, I mean, because he has a shooting attack, which is a really good shooting attack. So he can come on, he can do the shooting, then he can move, and I think he can then get right up, and then I think you're looking at a 4-inch charge with Durthu.
Yeah, he will need a 4.
After that, and in combat, he is a beast. He's taken a bit of a hit now. You can't take Gerstrike, so he's not quite what he was. But I mean, still, his damage output potential is amazing.
Yeah, the combo that I'm looking to run with him is taking him and a Tree Lord Ancient as my 2 picks. Yeah. So the Tree Lord Ancient throws the trees down first to where Durthu wants to be. And generally, like, you might think this is like, oh, well, my opponent will just move away, put it near an objective. And all of a sudden, Durthu is a threat near that objective. They have to worry about a Durthu coming up and biting them in the butt. Like, if you do plans like that near an objective, it's a threat, even if your opponent doesn't go there. Just throwing them down, your opponent going, I don't want to go near that objective now because a Durthu's going to come and eat me.
Yeah. And just to clarify, Luke, can you just tell us the significance of having that Wildwood?
So Durthu gets extra attacks if he is near a Sylvaneth Wildwood. That is the big thing. Now, there's been a lot of chatter, and I see this question get asked a lot, that Sylvaneth wizards, regardless of where they are, get the Verdant Blessing spell. It is not true because it is a Sylvaneth allegiance, as all things in the magic items and such, magic laws and all that are allegiance abilities. So therefore, because you're not playing Sylvaneth, you do not get that spell. That is how it all tracks back. We actually had to do this the other day with a friend for something else. Can't remember what we were looking at. But either way, we track back, and effectively everything in allegiance ability is an ability. So because it all tracks back to being under allegiance abilities, which are abilities. So anyway, that is not a thing. So the only way you can get Wildwoods thrown out in Living City is by having the Tree Lord Ancient use his ability or command ability. Either way, it's a one-use ability he's got. Whether it's his command ability, I don't think it's his command ability. I think it's just an ability.
Yeah. I want to talk about Dryads a little bit. I don't think they're a really obvious choice because they're not really seen as an elite unit, but as someone who collected Wood Elves and you want to kind of see that old unit, that old aesthetic, they're something that you want to bring, that you could bring, and they are a battle line unit just in general.
Yep. They're the only pure battle line in a Sylvaneth army as well.
Yeah.
I believe.
And they do have quite a lot of attacks. They've got 2 attacks each with the 2-inch range.
Yep.
And I was thinking about this the other day. I don't think I've not thought this through fully to fruition and how it really looks on the battlefield. But I was just thinking, if you took a big unit of them, like 20 or 30, and then you coupled that with the Wardroth Horn item from the Living City army, what their attacks would then look like.
Yeah, that's 3 attacks apiece. And you could always have that Wardroth Horn on a second Sylvaneth hero, maybe taking an Arch Revenant near them to put them up to 4.
I just feel like the Wardroth Horn, so for those of you who don't know, the Wardroth Horn is a once per battle item, and then you sound it, and all Sylvaneth units will get +1 attack for that phase. But I think if you're bringing, for example, a Tree Lord Ancient, you don't really care that he gets +1 attack.
Yeah.
And things like that. So I'm just trying to think of units that it would benefit, and I think
it is worth mentioning that you do get 2 crushing grips with that, because the Clawed Talon attack that kills things with a Tree Lord, because that actually has an attack profile. So that is worth, an extra attack on that is okay. It's worth mentioning that you will get, because it's not like a Troggoth one or a Gargant one where in its ability it's actually an attack profile. So there is that benefit to it. Wardroth Horn, I think the big thing is if you've taken a big unit of Kurnoth Hunters for me. You take Durthu and a unit of Kurnoth Hunters as your 2 picks. Because generally, I think you're going to have 2 Sylvaneth units in your army if you max it out. Just because of how expensive Wanderers are as a core. I don't think how units of 10 don't do much for Wanderers. 10 Eternal Guard, we said they're really good, but 10 of them just will die. It's not enough. And the Wildwood Ranges, 10 of them don't matter. So I think that's probably the best use of the Wardroth Horn, is taking Durthu and a unit of Kurnoth Hunters with him.
I'm just reading this, and I don't know if this has been FAQ'd or not. So until the start of your next hero phase, add 1 to the attack characteristics of melee weapons used by Living City Sylvaneth units. So if I play another Living City army that has Sylvaneth units, and I blow the horn, do I give them +1 attack? I don't think it's been FAQ'd. I don't know. No,
it hasn't. Yeah, you give +1 attack. It's one of those weird things like when Nurgle play Nurgles.
It's just one to be wary of if there's ever that matchup.
So I think that's probably the best thing. There is still we were talking about Durthu before. There is still probably one super Durthu build. You make him your general. You give him Iron Oak Artisan, so he's got +1 save. And I think it's +1 to wound as well that he gets.
Yeah, +1 to wound.
Yeah. And then you give him the Spear of the Hunt as well.
Yeah, which improves his rend characteristic by 1, and he'll fight at the start of the combat phase.
Makes it rend 4. That's the combo that I'm going for. We're dropping the Tree Lord Ancient, throwing down a Woods, having Durthu on the table. He's got Iron Oak Artisan, and then he's also got that.
And you're playing that with the battalion as well.
Yeah.
Nice. What are you going to have on the table, just to start with?
So I've got some Eternal Guard units in the army. The Wild Riders that I've taken in the battalion will probably start on the table as well.
I'm just thinking for your drops, because it's 1 on, 1 off, 1 on, 1 off.
And the Ancient starts on the table.
Yeah.
And you probably want the Ancient on the table anyway, because he's a Dispel.
Yeah.
He's also a character that starts on the table, so you can try and get some objectives if you're playing those scenarios. I mean, I'm painting up the army now. It's probably not going to be the final army. I'm doing this unsmart thing of painting up the army then playing it. So there's going to be
I'm the
zero
same. I just prefer to play with painted models, so I'm the same.
Yeah. So we'll paint this and we'll see how it goes, and we'll paint up a few different Wanderer units.
Cool.
But I think we've pretty much covered everything there is to cover about like bringing your Wanderers in. We've talked about the old units. We talked about what survived. We've talked about Living City and bringing, the band back together with some Sylvaneth. I guess the last thing, like we touched on it before, is like the future of Wood Elves in Age of Sigmar. And it quite clearly, with the Kurnothi coming out in Cursed City, seems to be that Kurnothi is that future. They seem to have gone... I mean, I look at the lady that came out, the elf in Cursed City, and everything about her just... While she's got that Waywatcher pose, she looks like a Wildwood Rider. A Wild Rider.
Mm. What really excited me about that is, as an old elf player, is that it talked about little things in the article about her that are really familiar. It talked about there was a reference to the Oak of Ages past.
Yep.
As the Oak of Ages was destroyed and then just fell into the realm of life, or rotted and decayed, and it was gone, as far as I remember. But now there's this Oak of Ages past, which is nice.
Yeah, it'd be really interesting because I think we're about to hit a time where Wood Elves are about to, or Wood Elf related things are about to hit the ascendancy soon.
They're gaining momentum now, aren't they? People are talking about them more.
And like people always talk to like, oh, what if it was a one-off for a Kurnothi? Games Workshop is smart. I have never seen the internet so excited when those Kurnothi models, Skaith's Wild Hunt, like I've never seen an Underworld's warband create as much hype as they did. Like the vampires didn't hit anywhere near what Kurnothi did. Like when Kurnothi dropped, the internet like went crazy for them, and like I've never seen an Underworld's warband just create like the Facebook group was a couple of hundred members within a few hours. There was like Discord servers dedicated to them. There was a WhatsApp group for Kurnothi. Like people were legitimately like really excited about that. If they weren't planning to make them an army, Games Workshop aren't stupid. They went to whoever made Skaith's Wild Hunt and go, cool, make more. Like,
I think what was really good about Skaith's Wild Hunt, what they managed to capture brilliantly, was like there's some familiarity there, but it's brand new. Like you said, you look at the hair and the aesthetic of them, and you're thinking, right, am I going to see war dancers? You've got the line. You think, am I going to see a return of beastmasters and different monsters and things
he's
like that?
He's a centaur, so the deer, like he's a deer centaur, like he's got deer feet, not a horse.
Yeah, and then they made me think of a kind of a new version of Wild Riders, and then you think, is the Wild Hunt going to come back? There's so many little tiny details within that one warband that allude to so much that we used to love. It just feel you can't help but be excited when you look at it and think about the way things go or may go.
Yeah, like they just put so much into that one warband that there was just so much different sort of little tidbits you could take away. And I mean, they're called the Wild Hunt. They're Skaith's Wild Hunt. But I think we've pretty much talked about all we can talk about for Living City, and we're pretty much getting it to the end of the time. So I'd like to say thank you for coming and joining me again. We will have to do another one of these sometime soon, whenever we both get the time.
Oh, thank you very much for having me, Luke. It's always a pleasure to come and chat with you, especially if it's about what else.
Yeah. I hopefully will get these models painted up and get them on the table in some battle reports for people soon enough. So we'll have some Living City Wanderers on the table again.
Yeah, really looking forward to seeing how they play, to be honest, mate. Can't wait.
Yeah. But that's going to be it from us today, everyone. Thank you all for watching. stay safe, stay well, and most of all, keep fighting that war against the Grey. Ciao for now.